you started to get involved with child deaths through abuse in London. All of the cases involved the notion that the children had Kindoki. Describe how you got involved in that and the trail that led you on.
Yeah, really what happened is the Adam case triggered a whole lot of other cases, or at least rather my involvement in a whole lot of other cases. So we'd had Victoria Columbia in 2000, and then I was called in on the Child B case in 2003. This is the story of a little girl who was found shivering and cold on the steps of a block of flats in Hackney in 2003. She had been very badly beaten, cuts to the body, she had chili peppers rubbed in her eyes. She had been threatened, as now we then found out, with being killed. And all because they said that she was possessed by Kindoki, witchcraft. And I'll just come on to that in a second, but there have been a string of other cases that I've been involved in surrounding that. And most infamously, I suppose, this year, in 2012, the case of Christy Banner, who was beaten to death violently 18 months ago in East London, because again they thought that he had witchcraft, that people around him thought he had witchcraft. What's happened is that the church, the fundamentalist church, has come into the situation with Kindoki in Africa, and it's, instead of Kindoki now being an outside force, instead of this idea that you have an evil eye, sort of witchcraft being thought of as something outside, now it's something that can possess you, and particularly possesses children. It actually takes hold of you within. And the only way to get rid of that is to be delivered of it and to be exorcised.
It goes back to the medieval phrase, possessed of the devil.
Completely. That's exactly right.
So it is within...
Yeah, absolutely. And they do quite literally beat the hell out of some of these children as a result. And this is this new sort of form of it that is terrifying to see taking place. It is, of course, a pretext for social, economic, political pressures. I've literally heard mothers saying to me, they can't afford to keep their children, and so they push them out on the streets and say they have witchcraft. And into this, some of these new pastors in the pop-up churches, as we call them, the revivalist churches, manipulate that undoubtedly for some financial gain, but also power. And it's a horrendous situation at the moment in parts of Africa.
But how common is it in Europe? I mean, there've been these very high-profile cases. Is this common behaviour, or is this exceptional behaviour?
No, I think it's more common than it's certainly more common than we hear about. The pastors are generally quite canny. They know that the police, social services, and media are onto this issue, and so they're keeping their heads tucked quite firmly below the parapet. But it's taking place within families. I've got something like 10 cases at the moment that are involved with witchcraft accusations. And that's a lot of cases, really, and I suspect that is the tip of the iceberg. From chatting to people within the communities, we may be talking 10 times that much in terms of cases going on in London, so there might be 100 odd children, perhaps more, quite possibly more, that are being accused of witchcraft. In parts of Africa, it's absolutely endemic. There are, estimates suggest anything between 20 and 50,000 children on the streets of Kinshasa. The vast majority of them there because of being accused of having witchcraft. So it is, and that's just one city. So it's become a major problem in parts of Africa.
And so you're getting large numbers of street children as a result of...
Yeah. I mean, what I tried to do, I made a documentary in 2006 with BBC called Witch Child, and I tried to get beneath the surface of just the sensational stuff and tried to see if we could try and understand it, which is what I try and do in the book The Boy in the River. I try to get beneath the surface and try and make sense of what's going on. And there's no doubt that economic, political, social pressures, the war in the DRC has definitely propelled this issue and made this pretext so possible that children can be accused of having witchcraft and being pushed out on the streets. And some of the pastors are definitely manipulating that situation.
You imply in the book that there is financial gain as sort of one of the drivers. I was less convinced because it didn't seem to me to provide a human explanation. It does seem to me that there is some deep human need that is being satisfied by...
Well, I agree. In a sense, I agree. I've written and presented papers on scapegoat theory, and I think all societies try and create a scapegoat. And I think what's happening here is that children have now become the scapegoats in this. And I think sociologically, there's no doubt that that's true. But the pastors are gaining from it. I mean, they're definitely making money as well as getting power from it.
But what would the children with Kindoki be scapegoats for?
I think what's happening is that anything that goes wrong is being blamed on Kindoki. So anything at all that goes wrong, whether it's financial trouble right through to immigration issues, which we get a lot of in London here, anything like that is being forced onto the child as the scapegoat. But it can be also as mundane as sleepwalking or bad dreams. Anything at all is being used as a pretext.
You were talking earlier about religions, particularly Christianity, being, in a sense, geographically defined, culturally defined. How do you view that yourself? You start in the book as a Christian. I'm not sure where you end up,
Right.
but how do you regard?
Well, the human person Jesus was a Jew,
Yes.
and therefore Middle Eastern. We don't know that much about him, except that he probably came from this tiny little town called Nazareth, and therefore was a northerner within Israel, and that's his sort of cultural background. The church then in the first few centuries applied an awful lot of cultural layer to him, pictured him in the form of the Emperor Constantine after his conversion, undoubtedly linked him to some sort of Greek sort of notions of Hellenistic notions of God, and then of course they assumed an awful lot of pagan and Celtic type practices, including the calendar and other things, and assimilated them within Christianity. So Christianity has always been culturally bound from the very start. The form of Christianity we have is massively influenced by what actually was in existence way before the person Jesus, right from the date of Christmas through to a whole host of other things that through Easter and all sorts. And I think it's important when you step outside of your own culture, perhaps you see that and you start to realise actually that it's incredibly culturally bound. I can remember being in church in the Congo where there are palm fronds and the heat is absolutely massive, and you suddenly think actually Christmas really doesn't have an awful lot to do with Christianity. Actually, it's not really a very Christian festival, weirdly, and at least not in the West. And actually unpicking that is quite important, and this is where I think African Christianity has so much to offer actually, and it can help strip away a lot of those layers. But all religions are bound by their culture.
And where does that take you in terms of the journey you've made? Because you've made clearly a considerable journey through a number of cultures and a number of beliefs. In terms of your own set of beliefs?
Well, you're right that I don't lay it on the line in the book. I hint. The journey in the book, in The Boy in the River, is and I can say this quite candidly, I think now, is in some ways a journey out of faith. It is a journey away from faith. It's a journey of a lot of pain. Those who read the book will realise that there's been a hell of a lot of pain in my life. I don't tell it all in the book, but there has, and also realisation that actually spirituality is not bound and confined to one religion, and that's where I'm coming from in a sense. I can remember standing in the mosque of Omar in Jerusalem and being absolutely blown away by a sense of what Rudolf Otto called the holy other, the numinous, and that led me to think that actually no one religion has a sole monopoly of spirituality. And then I think when I've encountered so much suffering in the world, I think it's made me question on a deep theological level belief in the goodness of a God who is able to intervene in this world. There was a defining moment apart from the one that obviously happens to me in the book, which I tell in The Boy in the River. There's this defining moment where this woman came to me in the Congo in the middle of the rainforest, and she just looked me in the eyes. She said, 5 of my 9 children have been buried. What can you say to me? And it was a moment where I think at that moment I thought my Christianity is dying at this point, because I did not have an answer. And I know that I've wrestled with this, and I went to theology at Oxford afterwards, and I've wrestled with this, but and of course there's the picture of Jesus hanging on a cross who is supposed to represent and take on board suffering, but it's not quite enough for me. There's too much suffering in this world for me to cling to any sort of semblance of traditional belief any longer.
Richard, thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you.